Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer, and today I got a couple of articles that I want to talk to you about, some ideas for the summer of this channel, probably. We'll see. We'll see when I jump on that, if that is what I want to do, and I would love your thoughts on the plans. And then an article I mentioned last week, which is, do we still need a women's prize in literature? So before we get into all of that, though, a couple of things. Number one, if you enjoy what I do on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. The two ways to be featured are, one is Lamoy, which is the monthly prompt writing contest here, where I give you guys a prompt, you respond to the prompt, and the best stories of the month, the top stories of the month, some of the stories of the month, because I don't want to discourage anybody, but some of the stories of the month are shared then on the first Monday video of the month. Have I said month enough yet? And we bask in your creative geniuses. The other way is, if you are an indie author with a book out or a book coming out, submit it to the Fresh Meat feature, where it will be read here on the channel at a random interval, because I pick randomly from the pool, and hopefully that'll help more readers find your book, because you've got exactly what somebody is looking for. They just haven't found you yet. And hopefully this can help bring awareness. Then number three, if you would like to check out any of my books, they are linked down in the description below. You can get them at any of your favorite retailers, and I hope you enjoy, and I hope you check them out and enjoy. Now, to get into this, before I get started in the actual news, I've been thinking about this for like a couple of weeks, but what I like to do on this channel is kind of cover writing things, writing and industry news, publishing news, opinions going around in writing, and you know, I only have so many eyes myself. Some of the things that I've covered on this channel, other people have sent me because they have an interest in seeing the opinions or in seeing the ideas shared. So with that in mind, I'm gonna put a form down below in the description where, if you've got any articles about writing industry, publishing, literature, writing advice, anything that you would like to see me cover on the channel because you want to see it talked about, or you want to bring awareness to it, or you want my opinion on it, just send it in the form below. And you can do this as often as you want for whatever you want. I can't promise in what order I will get to the stories, but I would like to best serve you guys with the conversations and the publishing industry stuff that you feel like is important to be known. And I try to do my best in both sharing my thoughts on stuff, but also not like inciting certain things. Aside from the AI stuff, I am angry at the AI stuff. But other than but you know, otherwise I try to cover things as equally as I can, while still giving my opinion, and then we can agree or disagree, which I've really enjoyed in the last couple of weeks, being able to share on certain ideas on certain things and share articles on certain things, and still be able to disagree and be amicable and not hate each other. For anybody in the comments that, you know, disagreed, I appreciate you. I appreciate any time where we can actually have a conversation and just say, I disagree, but I don't think that you're the devil for disagreeing, because I can see that we both are both approaching this with care, even if we've got different ways of interpreting it or have different opinions on something. So I appreciate that, and if you have anything you'd like me to cover or respond to or whatever, send it into the form and I will try if it seems appropriate for what I do on this channel. With that said, oh my goodness. With that long-winded notion said, let's get into the articles. The first article comes from USA Today. James Patterson: if Florida bans my books, no kids under 12 should go to Marvel movies. As the culture wars rage, books increasingly are on the front lines. Now, I've already talked about how I feel about the words banned and how it's being used as a marketing tactic. I don't think this is any different, but we're going to get into that with what Patterson says and my opinions on this, and I would love to know yours. If you're interested in any of the stories about to be talked about today, the links will also be in the description below, so you can check them out for yourself if you would like. Across the country, local, state, and some national officials are moving to ban certain titles on the grounds that books are tackling racism, sexuality, and gender identity impose a threat to younger readers. And some librarians and teachers who push back against such bans have faced harassment and dismissal. Many of these alleged controversial books are familiar staples, school staples written by long-beloved authors such as The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger and Beloved by Toni Morrison. So one thing that I want to mention already at this point is because of that, I actually went to the ALA's website. That is the Association for the American Library Association's website, and they actually have a list of the most challenged books for the last number of years. And if you go down to 2021 is the most recent listing that they have, the books, none of the top 10 books are either Catcher in the Rye or Beloved. Now, I'm sure those are being challenged in places because this just says these make 729 challenges out of 1,597. So these were just the most common. But this is also claiming that but this is also using these two books as its expressions of what's being banned, while also not being listed by the ALA as the most challenged, and even on the list for the previous year. So we got Gender Queer by Maya Kobabe, Lawn Boy by Jonathan Evison, All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson, Out of Darkness by Ashley Hope Perez, The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, The Absolute True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl by Jesse Andrews, The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. I don't know why they didn't use The Bluest Eye in this, but they used Beloved instead. This Book is Gay by Juno Dawson, and Beyond Magenta by Susan Cucklin. So I don't know also why they didn't say like what grades these are being challenged in or anything like that, but they do have listed underneath the reasons, theoretically, for why they were banned. And if you go to the year after that, you've got George by Alex Gino, Stamped, Racism, Anti-Racism, and You by Ibram X. Kendi and Jason Reynolds, All American Boys by Jason Reynolds and Brandon Keeley, Speak by Lori Halson Anderson, The Absolute True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie, Something Happened in Our Town, A Child's Story About Racial Injustice by Marion Solano, Moretta Collins, and Hazard, illustrated by Jennifer Zivoyne, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, again, you should have used that one, and The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. And, it's not always this sort of thing. For 2019, you had some of the same, but you also have some other interesting, these shouldn't be in school challenges on here. Like, here's one for Harry Potter, Handmaid's Tale. If you keep going down, there's actually, you might be surprised at some of the stuff that is in schools. Some of these things may be unjustly challenged because of wherever the challenges are coming from. That would be interesting demographic information to have, like what states, what areas, what school years are these covering for. That would be interesting. 13 Reasons Why was challenged in 2017 for reasons. The Kite Runner was challenged. Sex is a Funny Word, an informational children's book. See, I would like to know what grades that was being presented to, because parents should be allowed to determine what their schools are presenting to their children. But you keep going, and there are, let me see if I can find it here. 2015, 50 Shades of Grey. Why was that in a school library? The Holy Bible was incidentally also one of the most challenged books in that year. Oh, here's Saga. I know that that's got depictions of sex in it. Why is that in a school? That's a comic book. Perks of Being a Wallflower, drama. So we've got a variation in here of some books that should probably definitely not be in schools, like 50 Shades of Grey. But what about this other stuff? So over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of controversy about books being banned from schools, which is really just the schools that are funded by the taxpayers of that area, what their children can be given by those schools or have available to them by those schools. There's not really a lot of discussion of what is actually in the books beyond, what these reasons are that are listed here. So what my plans are for the next couple of months is I'm going to go through these 10 books from 2021, since that's the newest that we got, and maybe I'll go into some of them from 2020. And I'm going to do the book summary and analysis like I normally do from a literary standpoint, so that you guys can know, if you're interested, what the actual stories are within these books. And so you can make your determinations on your own, but I'm going to do the same style of literary analysis like I typically do with all of my other book reviews. So possibly keep an eye out for that if you're interested in this, because I think that it's worth something to actually have people go through these books, much like I did with A Jack of Hearts, and I did that last year, because that was being given to 12-year-olds. So I'm going to do that with all of these books, I think. And if they release their most challenged books for 2022, I will take a look at that as well. And then we can just see what these books are together. And if you don't trust if you don't trust the way that I present the information, then I still always recommend that you check out the books for yourself and make your own decisions. I can only do what I can do and let you know based on my disposition. Personally, since I haven't seen people really going through these books to say exactly what is in them, but really just saying one way or another in support or defiance of the books, that it is worthy to go through them and see what sort of storytelling they are offering. But again, I think we're missing something by not having the grades or levels of the schools that these are being taken out of. Some of them never needed to be in school in the first place, like 50 Shades of Grey, but we can talk about whether we think that these books should be in school or not if we want in the comments. I'm just going to do my typical analysis. Anyway, getting back to the article and why this got all spawned on. This week, best-selling author James Patterson was pulled into a fray when school district officials in Martin County, Florida, removed his young adult series Maximum Ride from elementary school library, but kept it accessible for older students. I want this to be very much remembered, as it was only removed from younger grades. That is 5 to 10-year-olds. I think 5 is kindergarten. But 10-year-old is 5th grade, and then 11-year-old becomes middle school. This was just removed from elementary schools and kept for older schools. But James Patterson in this article are saying that he was banned from schools. Curating for age appropriateness is not banning from schools. If not having your book in a public school is a banning, then I am one of the most banned authors of my time period, because I am not in any schools. Where are my school sales? So this feels like a marketing pitch and entitlement, and using these specific words to get sympathy for what is a major sale by getting schools to buy and carry your books. Because we all have this emotional reaction and this trained reaction to the word banned, because yeah, we don't want to see books banned. It's a terrible thing, we think, because all the books should be out there. Technically, personally, I've read some books that definitely deserve to be burned. I'm sorry. I'm sure other people have too. I have thrown books in the recycle bin because I would have felt bad donating them. I don't hold it against anybody else for hating a book so much that they want to destroy it. I think it's silly to publicly destroy it, but you know, we can all, some people write bad reviews. I recycle a book if it's that terrible. And let me tell you, there are books that are that terrible. Next week, I will be doing a book review for a book called Paper Princess, and it is sold. It is listed as a children's ebook with some graphic sex scenes in it. And synthetic incest. That's the plot, and abuse. I'll leave it up to you to get your opinions. Anyway, in my opinion, there's really nothing wrong with curating a school district to carry books that are appropriate for the age group that you are servicing. It's not a ban to say these books shouldn't be read by elementary school students. By saying 50 Shades of Grey shouldn't be given to a 7-year-old is not a book ban. But I think that words are being used too flippantly, and they're politically charged words that are meant to make you want to fight. Because what other reaction is there if you're saying books are being banned, authors are being banned, words are being banned, free speech is being banned? We need to band together. I have seen it so much, specifically with pornography, that people go, oh, I'm a banned author because I wrote pornography. I see you, The Wild. I see. So there's a whole network of them now that are the dark romance, smut, incest, especially, that they sell themselves as banned books by being super outrageous smut that the normal person doesn't really want to read. It's not banning, and I'm kind of really sick of that being used as a marketing tool. Anyway, Moving on. Patterson tweeted about the incident Monday, urging fans who found mindless book banning troubling and confusing to write to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who has been aggressively waging the culture war. We caught up with Patterson on Wednesday. He expanded his concerns. Question: Martin County did not ban Maximum Ride, but instead has removed access for elementary school students. What do you make of this? Patterson said, it's a distinction with some merit, but not a lot, because it's not a book anyone should be taking out of elementary schools. Can I get a reason why it shouldn't be taken out? What was the reason that the parents gave and why? Because this is not telling why, it's just saying, hey, it was taken out. How do you feel about this? Are you going to override the parents and their choice of how to raise their children? There is nothing in that book that should scare anyone. Kids who are into science and math love it because I talked to scientists for it about whether you can put wings on kids, which is kind of fun. If you're going to ban this book, then no kid under 12 should go to any Marvel movies. We also don't know who the parents were, what the parents were like who asked for this book to be removed. Maybe they don't take their kids to Marvel movies. This is a lot of assumption about the character of the parents and how many parents were even involved in this. I don't really see the problem because the parents can still go and get the book Maximum Ride for their kids. If the school district decides it doesn't need to be in the library, then it doesn't need to be in the library. And what if this removal from the library was just because kids didn't read this book and it was time to remove the book? Like they were just cycling through. We don't have any information. And so then this just feels like it's a political something to get you worked up because we don't have the information, and these words do get an emotional response out of you. Question: have Martin County school officials reached out to you? No, they haven't, Patterson said. The troubling thing is the school district is making decisions about books. Individuals that haven't read the book, if based on one person's objection you take books off the shelves, then we're going in the wrong direction. Number one, we don't know how many people were involved in removing books from the shelf. Number two, how do we know that the librarians hadn't read the book? Number three, we also already know that there is a problem with the school library books and librarians either not doing their job or dubiously doing their job, because we have 50 Shades of Grey being one of the most requested to remove from school library books in the last 10 years. Why was 50 Shades of Grey in there? Like, it's not like it's one of these other books where you might be sketchy on what is the content of the book. Everyone knew what 50 Shades of Grey was. Why was it in school libraries? Ever? So there are probably problems going on with schools. We don't know which the problems are, which schools are actually having their librarians read the books and which aren't. This is too vague to make a statement, and it's really weird to consider a school calling somebody who doesn't use the school to ask if their book should be there or not. He continues, the only time I was banned was for the Jericho Commandment, a 1979 novel about terrorists at the 1980 Moscow Olympics, and that was banned in Russia, so that's ironic. Again, and you're using a boogeyman of Russia, because that's where everybody's anger is at right now. Can we not do that? I just can't stand emotional and political manipulation. Question. You've mentioned this is personal for you. How so? Answer. A lot of people talk the talk, but I do stuff. I've spent 40 years funding school libraries. I've spent 40 years funding teacher libraries. My mother was a teacher in a Catholic school. She paid for her own classroom library, but I've been funding independent libraries, hundreds of teacher scholarships, and I have an imprint for children. But I also happen to own a house in Martin County. I bought it for one of my sisters there, and my niece has kids going to school in Martin County. So yeah, that makes it a little personal. Okay, you say it's personal. It's also personal for other people. So why not let the people dealing with that school district do what they want to do with their kids? Question. You live nearby in Palm Beach County. Would you consider speaking directly to Martin County School Board officials? That just feels like elitism, saying, look, I'm too important. You have to listen to me over the constituency and the parents in your area. Patterson, I almost went up there, and if the book had been totally banned, I would have. But if I did speak to them, I'd say, look, absolutely, it's important for you to keep your kids safe, and you should do a better job at that. Arrogance much? If a book comes into your home with your child, ask them, what is it about? Are you enjoying it? Oh, you're having nightmares? Let's talk about it. But there are far scarier things on the internet than there are in the library. Yes, but also you don't need to give permission to things that you don't believe your child is ready for. You don't need to protect your kid from this because there are worse things. James, please. Question: can authors targeted by bans make a difference in this heated debate? Answer: there certainly needs to be teeth in the response to this. If this continues, school boards will face lawsuits from publishers, from authors, and you will go right after the school or the people on the school boards, because you just can't go out there and make irresponsible decisions. These folks need to read the books, find out about the books, and in rare cases that there is something so incredibly objectionable, I suppose maybe then you react. I want to know if James Patterson does believe that there are books that shouldn't be in public schools. Would James Patterson agree that 50 Shades of Grey should not be available in any school, K through 12? Because it sounds like this is just a blanket, most things are fine in school, but there might be some egregious things. I've heard stories of so many people finding incestuous pornography in their school libraries, that there is something going on that does need to be addressed with people reading the books that are in the libraries. I do agree with James that people should be reading the books, and that's one of the reasons I'm going to do the book reviews of the most challenged books of the last couple of years. But does James actually believe that there are some books that just should not be in schools? Because this sounds like that's a very, very rare occasion, and I think there might be a little bit more dubious stuff going on in these situations. I also don't really understand how you can sue a school for not carrying your book in it. That's interesting to me, as somebody not carried in schools. Can you help me out there, James? Or is this just like a power move that somebody with a big dick can do, and so I can't, because I got a little dick? The question then ends with, what's your worst scenario for the nation that continues to ban books? This is not a book ban. Removing books from school is not a book ban. I wish we would stop using that language so flippantly. But he says, you'll have a country of people with no sense of history or ideas, none, zero. One of the wonderful things about books is it allows us to find out about different ways of thinking, of living, different problems people have, different ways of enjoying, finding joy, and you can explain a world through a library, and that's a good thing. To cut it down is not useful. True, books are a great thing. Storytelling is a great thing, but you can set things that are inappropriate for the age or inappropriate for the venue. That is not wrong. But let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below, because I'm just repeating myself at this point. The next two articles I'm just gonna mention very quickly because it's an idea that briefly came up before when talking about Roald Dahl, and this happened almost immediately after Roald Dahl, as you can see with March 9th. Goosebumps author R.L. Stine says that he wasn't shown inclusive edits made by publisher. This is the living author of Goosebumps, and he said that he found out about changes made to his book by the publisher, who owns the rights to his story. So they really, as far as I know, because contractually, I don't think that you own the rights to your story anymore based on what your contract is with publishers, which is one of the dangers of traditional publishing at this point, is you sell off your right to you owning the story. They get to do whatever they want with it. But he found out that they made changes to his manuscript, much in the way that they did Roald Dahl. Check out my video from about 2 weeks ago for that. And didn't tell him that they made changes for inclusive language in his manuscript. I was told that this is not a big issue, that it is not being done all that much, but it is. We also got a story of why I decided to update language in Ursula K. Le Guin's children's books. So this is happening a lot, all over the creative spectrum. And I think it is dishonest to change the words of an author who, especially one, I think it is dishonest to change the words of an author from their published works, not telling them if they are alive and changing them post-mortem, because there's nothing that they can do about what you are now assigning to have been their words. If you're going to do that, you need to put a label on it and let people know constantly that you have changed the language, but that's not happening. But let me know what you think on that in the comments below. Both of these articles will be linked down in the description if you want to check them out for yourself. So then we can jump into this Quillette article. Do we still need the Women's Prize in fiction? And I will look forward to your guys' comments on this as well, much like I did with the Women Are Dominating fiction from last week. Whether we agree or not, though, I would love to hear your thoughts, because being able to converse and see why people think the way they think, or the different directions that everybody comes from, is, I think, how we find a better place of being where everyone's not mad at each other. So that's let's get into it. This is from March 10th of this year. Josh Allen writes, "It is time to consider retiring awards segregated by sex of the author." On March 7th, the long list of the 2023 Women's Prize for Fiction was announced. The prize was established in 1996, partially in response to the 1991 Booker Prize, in which no women were featured on the shortlist. The omission was symptomatic of a bias lingering in the literary establishment more generally, despite a steep rise in the number of female authors and editors during the 1990s. Although some notable figures voiced their reservations about the prize, it was nonetheless widely celebrated as an important platform that would accelerate the march toward gender equality. It is difficult to pinpoint exactly when gender equality was achieved. It is difficult to pinpoint exactly when gender equality was achieved in publishing, but it was achieved, and it was achieved quicker than anyone could have foreseen. Even in 1996, I was born a year after the first Women's Prize for Fiction, or the Orange Prize, as it was known then, and I've since witnessed the transformation of the literary landscape from conglomerate of chain-smoking madmen into the Amazonian empire of enterprising young women. To the older generation of publishers who remember the last few decades with clarity, the change must have seemed particularly rapid. In the afterword of Circus of Dreams, his new memoir about the professional life spent in the 1980s bookstore, the publishing veteran John Walsh explained just how much things have changed. Quote, "In the 1980s, female authors seemed to have a harder time getting published than men. For the first appearance of the Granta Best of Young British Novelists promotion counted only 6 women in the 20 writers. Today, new male writers struggle to be signed up. A search of the Booksellers News archive for 2020 revealed that of the 77 debut novels that featured in the news pages, only 7 were by men. It is, of course, Walsh adds, a good thing that gender imbalance could be redressed, but when in the 2020s male writers are told that nobody wants to hear their stories and commissioning editors and modern publishers are advised not to take on books that won't sell until they're part of an acceptable demographic, the literary landscape seems to be very bleak. The absence of male authors in bestseller lists or on the front desk shelves of Waterstone and Angus and Robertson can be easy to overlook. After all, how does one notice something that isn't there? But to budding male authors, the knowledge that their chances of publication are infinitesimal. You want to be like, this is a master's degree, everybody. Infinitesimal can be demoralizing. 8 of the 13 writers longlisted for the 2020 Booker Prize, or Man Booker Prize as it is known, were women. A glance of the booksellers fiction list of Amazon reveals that around 80% of the fiction books featured in the top 25 on any given week were usually written by women. The men who were included on these lists of older authors, such as Alan Garner and Percival Everett, who came to prominence back when men still held the advantage. Debut male authors are nowhere to be seen. Now, this is a really difficult and more confusing, I think, subject to really be able to analyze because we don't know all of the variables. We've had more than enough people say that men are being discriminated against openly now in publishing. We've also had a bunch of people say, no, they're not being discriminated against now, but if they are, that's also a good thing because equality. So there's some reference to, yeah, it is actually happening, while also saying, no, it's not happening, but if it was happening, it's a good thing. And then you've got, how do you know that it's not just more people that are going through merit and succeeding, or that are applying for these things and succeeding, or that the imbalance, because not everything is going to ever be perfectly balanced. Having 50 and 50 of something is not going to mean that everybody deserved to be there and it somehow just magically happened to be even. You're always going to have an imbalance. The problem is when you have an imbalance and it is like more males on a list than more males on a list than females, it's often credited to the patriarchy and misogyny and a bias for men. But when it's more women on a list than men, it is people saying, oh, women have finally taken over. We're discriminating against men, which makes everybody question whether or not the women on that list deserve to be there. And it's very, very difficult, which is one of the reasons why this open discrimination, which if there's going to be discrimination, I prefer it to be open so that we can know that it's happening instead of being gaslit that it's not happening when it is happening. If you're gonna discriminate, just be honest about it, okay? So at least to thank you for that. But it's also very difficult to know who to trust, what to trust, on any of these lists and any of these situations because you know that there's this discrimination going on. And having an imbalance doesn't automatically mean discrimination until you have a situation like currently where a lot of people have talked about there's discrimination in these cases, and you can't talk about the discrimination because it will destroy your reputation. And I don't know what to tell you about there are accounts of people, other people saying it, and there are accounts of people saying that there is no discrimination. I'm not making a judgment either way on that. It's going to be up to you to determine who you believe and what you believe, but it has to be acknowledged that people have said there is discrimination just as much as they've said there is no discrimination. And we have to figure out what's the truth and how to resolve what the problem is here. Because at the moment, nobody is trusting anybody, okay? You've got a bunch of people saying, I'm not going to read women writers because of this, because they don't know if they're legit. You got a bunch of people saying, I'm not going to read male authors because patriarchy. And then everybody is just getting angry at everybody else. And personally, I have no idea what to do about it or how we fix any of this. So I just focus on reading and I don't care about the author. That's my solution. But I can't do anything for anybody else. Anyway, let me know what your thoughts are on any of that down below, because I don't freaking know. These discrepancies reflect a similar story in editorial marketing and development. My partner and I have both worked in publishing and can separately attest that women make up the lion's share of the workforce. And if anecdotal insights lack authority, consider the fact that according to the Publishers Association report on diversity, inclusion, and belonging, women now outnumber men in the publishing world by 2 to 1, a figure that has remained consistent since the first such report was released in 2015. The ascendancy of women in publishing was certainly overdue when I look at the demographic makeup of my English class at university or the book clubs I host. I'm given to suspect that there is something about literature and fiction in particular as a quietly contemplative endeavor that makes it more appealing to women than to men, who are generally happier kicking a ball around or mowing down zombies in cyberspace. But since the asymmetry that inspired the Women's Prize for fiction no longer pertains, is it unfair to ask if the time has come to reevaluate the necessity or indeed the morality of retaining such discriminatory competition? That is always a good question, not specifically just in this, but when something is put in place to try to give a chance where there wasn't one previously, or if you look at old laws that were put into place, or like the FBI, a lot of government programs that are like, this is to take care of a specific thing, and then it never expires, FBI. We're not investigating the mob anymore, are we? I digress. But it's always important, I think, to reevaluate when you put something in for a specific reason, because if that reason doesn't exist anymore for that thing, it might be a good reason to cut it. One of the keystones of conservative thought is that it is much more difficult to build something up than to tear it down. That's not conservative thought, that's just in general. Like, I don't appreciate that. As somebody who worked in theater and worked on more than a handful of plays, it took weeks to build the set. It would take hours to tear down the set and to strike all of the lights. It's not a conservative thought, it's just how it works. But the reverse seems to be true of institutions, programs, scholarships, and prizes designed to address social injustice. Even when their stated objectives are achieved by progressive reforms and the statistics are no longer on their side, a development that ought to be threatened with the obsolescence and irrelevancy, they have a habit of resorting to anecdotal evidence of a persistent problem. The sexism of a new status quo is either defended or denied outright, and those unwise enough to point it out risk potentially enormous consequences in our censorious climate of clickbait outrage. For young male authors, the existence of getting published are already slim, but they would be nigh on non-existent for anyone drawing attention to a disparity which flies directly in the face of the narrative, which we also saw this happen, or in the article from last week when that person working in the industry mentioned they saw discrimination against men, and other people they know saw discrimination against men, but they couldn't say anything because it would have destroyed their career, because it's just something you're not allowed to talk about. Which agent would be willing to sign up a writer faced with accusations of misogyny simply for pointing out the obvious? Where is the appeal in a poet, picture the paraphrastic headlines, who had been accused of believing that women ought to stay in their lane? Even established men in the industry feel cowed into silence, as Joanna Thomas Core discovered when she tried to speak to them about the topic on The Guardian. Quote, "The subject is such a hornet's nest that almost every man in the book industry who I approached refused to speak on the record for fear of the backlash." We've seen this all over the place. Now, whether you believe or not that is an issue, that's going to be on you, because we can only ever present information, and it's going to always be up to the individual to make up their mind on what they believe. There have been plenty of occasions where you can see how men are especially treated harshly for writing female characters, where it's assumed that poorly written female characters are a fault that only or mostly male authors have, and female authors doing the same tropes, terrible tropes, are given a pass. And it just is what it is, instead of letting either person write sex or sexuality or characters how they want and then just discuss it as it's written in the book as the perspective. It is instead focused on the demographics of the author, which is why none of you will ever see my dick. Which is one of the reasons why you will always see me fight against having to justify yourself and what you're writing with your demographics. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's conducive to anything. And I don't think bad writing belongs to either men or women. In the rare moments that the burgeoning imbalance between men and women is addressed, the media response tends toward gleeful schadenfreude. When conservative columnist Allison Pearson was invited to pass comment on the male authors adopting feminine pseudonyms to sell titles, an act of subterfuge that recalls the tribulations of George Eliot and the Brontes 200 years ago, she called it a marvelous role reversal, which I think is the cause for celebration and a small moment of triumph. The BBC interviewer offered no resistance, presumably because he wished to keep his career. The author Camilla Shamsi even made the absurd suggestion that publishers drop their male authors for the whole of 2018 to mark a century of women getting to vote. Fortunately, other women have spoken out against the exclusivity of the Girls Club and the vindictive nature of this literary overcorrection. Lionel Shriver, who won the Orange Prize in 2005 for her excellent novel We Need to Talk About Kevin, ooh, that's on my reading list, dismissed Shamsi's pipe dream of treating women specially as they need special help or special rules. When the Women's Prize for Fiction was first established, Walsh criticized it for the same reason, opining that it might lead people to infer that women writers are not as proficient, a sentiment echoed by feminist critic Germaine Greer and by A.S. Byatt, who refused to have her work considered for the prize. Keeping men and women separate in sports makes sense given the mean difference in physical capabilities between the sexes, but separating women into a league of their own resembles a kind of literary Paralympics. It leaves the unintended impression that women writers are not as talented as the male counterparts, especially considering the advantages they already enjoy. I also would not be opposed to there just being a men's only prize as well. In the same way that you've got, best male actress and best female actress, I think that's perfectly acceptable as well. You can either have a male only and a female only prize, or you can just abolish the women's prize and just have everybody be in the big one. But even then, if you had the male only and the female only, then you could also have the combined in the middle as well. If initiatives aimed at advancing the interests of women as a marginalized demographic were established to promote diversity in publishing, they are now having the opposite effect. As Shriver has pointed out in a recent Spectre article, the artificial oversaturation of women in publishing, almost all of whom are university-educated, left-leaning, and concentrated in London or New York, has transferred to a behemoth of English-language publishing into a small, politically homogenous world that rarely takes risks or rewards innovation. The market would rather play it safe, pandering to its increasingly niche audience, perfectly content to lose the business of half the world's population. It is now a truism that white males have a vanishingly small chance of being published anywhere, writes Shriver, although I've seen no market research verifying that the book-buying public don't want to read white males' works. And even if the public do want to read books written by men, publishers won't sell them. As Hannah Westland of Serpent's Tail has pointed out, there are fewer prizes open to men, fewer magazines that will cover male authors, and fewer media figures willing to champion them, all of which makes them too difficult to promote. Even a couple of years ago when I was going to college for undergraduate and for graduate, a couple of years ago, we're talking about freaking 15 years for undergraduate. It was hard to find scholarships for people like me. Deprived of opportunities, excluded from awards, absent from marketing, and barely represented in the publishing and editorial houses, what hope is there for young male writers going forward? To look to the future, perhaps we need to look to the past. The triumph of women in publishing can be boiled down to two forces working in tandem. The first is ethics. The increasingly liberal Britain of the late 20th century would no longer put up with the sexist standards of the industry, and so, in the wake of the sexual revolution, publishing had to adapt. The second force is women's love of literature, or men's lack thereof. As the old adage goes, demographics are destiny. As soon as the barriers to female employment and self-empowerment were lifted, women's dominance of the industry metamorphosed from the impossibility into the inevitability. That was something that came up in comments from last week, is there were some saying, pointing out that, hey, women typically read more, at least that's what it looks like, and so then these publishers are just servicing women, and if that's what it is, like I said, it's very hard to get to the bottom of exactly what is happening and how much is happening because of all of the variables that you have to take into consideration. And that's one thing that I think that we could really benefit from, having some open conversation about this stuff, to see how to start weighing everything, you know? Because I do think that at the moment, especially, women read more because men are typically more visual creatures. And so then men's storytelling, what's popular in men's storytelling may be in other mediums. Not to say that men don't read book or wouldn't be interested in reading books if there were more books that were servicing to that demographic. But I think it's an interesting conversation that we should be having about what people's interests are, what's being serviced, and the dominances in the industry, and so what all is happening and how is stuff being split up. I'm trying to do this in a very neutral way because I do think that there's a lot going on. So please accept my kind of like... Now that the gender ratio within publishing is more or less proportional to the gender ratio in the general readership, the way to erasure that male writers enjoy the same privileges and possibilities of their female counterparts is the recommitment to fairness. A road which has the exhausted force of ethics must walk alone. But as long as the vigils of the publishing purgatorio fold their arms and look away, stubbornly stroking an outdated narrative of male domination and an atmosphere in which men are too afraid to protest, perhaps there is nothing to do but to stay at the bottom. So again, we've got more thoughts of men not being able to talk about this discrimination, about the openness of the discrimination, about celebration where it's going like much needed reckoning. Got a lot of those words being used here. And so what are your thoughts? Is it being blown out of proportion? Do you think that you've seen a lot of this discrimination? Do you think that you've seen some maliciousness on either side, on both sides, on one side? Do you think that this is justified? Like I said while I was reading this, I think that the most fair thing to do in this situation would either be to stop doing the Women's Prize because the goal has been achieved, like it started out doing, because the goal of why it was started has been achieved, or to introduce a Men's Prize and then also have the joint category prize as well. Those were the topics. Those are my thoughts in general. And mostly I would love to see the conversation down below with what you guys think on any of these subjects. I hope we can still be friends at the end of everything. With that said, thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend, and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross.
Is he in trouble?
We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Way. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?